right, so hi, I'm Evelyn.
And I'm Robert.
And introducing...
Tristan Miller. You may recognize me from this podcast that you're listening to right now.
So as you can see, we have a very special guest today, our very first guest, which is very exciting.
Oh. Well, congratulations, and I'm sorry.
So the chapters we're going to be focusing on is The Ring Goes South and Journey into the Dark. And you had actually requested The Ring Goes South. So I wanted to ask you about where your love of Lord of the Rings comes in, and as well as what you really liked about this chapter.
Sure. I have been a fan of Lord of the Rings. My mother read it to us. We lived in Minnesota, but we would take trips to South Dakota growing up, where my family's from. And that's about a 12-hour drive. And one of these trips, my mother decided to read us Fellowship of the Ring, because we had read The Hobbit and we'd seen the 70s cartoon a lot. Yes. And so, yeah, which is, I would argue, a perfect movie. It is so silly.
Yes, Frodo of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom.
100%. I've learned and forgotten how to play that on guitar so many times. But yeah, we were kind of into that. And then so she decided, with the movies coming out, like, oh, I'll read these. So they can kind of come up with their own ideas about it before they get brainwashed by what Peter Jackson says. And so she started reading Fellowship on the trip, and then we kept wanting to hear more and more of it, and she almost lost her voice over the course of it. Because I don't know if you're aware, it's a very long book.
Yes. I've noticed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that was my first experience, and then my main experience after that, and it comes to one of the reasons I wanted to talk about these chapters and so forth, was I had a BBC radio production starring, funnily enough, Bill Nighy, of Being Famous fame. And Ian Holm played Frodo, who obviously he went on to play Bilbo in the movies, which is quite fun. Terrific actor. He recently passed away, rest in peace.
Yeah.
But that was my main introduction, and they were separated into chapters along with the books, that mimic the books. And this was the one I listened to the most, because it's a nice combination of at the beginning you have here's some information about the world, and here's some character stuff, and then you get some action and some weird events happening later on. But my main experience with the books as well is I have dyslexia, so I have not physically read the books ever, but I have listened to the books. I go to sleep listening to the books often, narrated by Robert Inglis, which they're available on Audible or your local library probably, and I highly recommend you listen to that, because he fully commits. He sings the songs.
Oh.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a heck of a journey. He does some decent voice work, but not so much that it's distracting. He does character voices, but he's not doing impressions or anything. And it was in this, I think, the 80s that it was recorded, so it's completely devoid of anything that we now consider Lord of the Rings due to how popular it got with the Peter Jackson films.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
As a dyslexic myself, I can say it's been interesting trying to read a lot of the names in Elvish in here.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. That's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, one of the interesting things when you listen to it, you often are going, oh, that's how that's pronounced.
100%. It's because I remember my mother pronounced it Moriah rather than Moria. Smeagol rather than Smeagol, and Celeborn rather than Celeborn, because she hadn't read the appendices and she's not a scholar, and that's how English works. So yeah.
Right. Well, this chapter, Ring Goes South. I didn't really say anything about this in previous chapters, but this one just kind of hit more at home with, I don't think Tolkien understood the concept of spoilers.
Okay.
I mean, because he said because the title is The Ring Goes South, and what happens?
It goes south.
Around,
Which brings us to predictions. I really only made one prediction, which was, it can't be that obvious. The ring's not going to go south.
Right.
It can't be that obvious, can it?
Can I tell you, though, there is a double meaning because their journey does not go well.
That is very true.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quickly goes south. That's correct.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is how long it took for them to get on the road.
Yes. It took them 2 months to get started.
Right. And they point out that they're doing this because they're waiting for word to get back.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But then somewhere Gandalf tells us, well, that information is so old, we really don't know.
Yeah. Just like kind of getting into the discussion. So immediately after the council, Frodo, Bilbo, and Sam kind of go meet the other hobbits who are upset that they missed the meeting. And they insist that they want to go on with them. Yeah. But they have to wait for news. But yeah, so Elrond has sent out news to try to find out what's going on with the Black Riders. And I just made a random comment that the Saxville Baggins were mentioned yet again. I have this weird obsession with the Saxville Baggins.
As well you should.
Yeah, and it's funny too because Frodo says, that's not very a good way to honor my birthday is by giving them rice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, how dare you, sir? And like, there's a great moment where I like how Frodo's like, well, the Black Riders are dead because they got drowned, presumably, because he doesn't know anything. And Gandalf's just like, they can't be destroyed. And he's like, but how could I possibly? There's a lot of like Gandalf being very, very uppity with these people.
Especially towards the hobbits in the next couple chapters. Yeah. Like I noted at a couple points that he and Pippin get into it a lot.
100%. And I understand, like, Pippin's like the equivalent of like a 20-something, typical millennial. Right. And he's like he doesn't pay attention well. He's clearly got ADHD. It's fine. So it's like Gandalf is constantly at his wit's end of just like, this person, yeah. I think for morale is good, but I want to die.
Yeah. And no wonder Frodo wanted to stay back in Rivendell for good.
Oh, yeah. 100%. It's also very interesting, like, you mentioned the time differential, and, like, not to talk, harp too much on the films, but they were, like, very formative about this property for me. It's, like, they changed so much of, like, even with the previous chapters of, like, how long Frodo waits to leave. Yeah. Which I understand why, because it is the Tolkien continues to do this thing of like, and it's realistic, where you would like hang around and like recuperate and stuff. But like he does this thing of like, and we're going, and then we wait for 17 years,
right,
before anything happens of note, and then we wait for 2 months hanging out, swapping stories.
Yeah, and we even mentioned it in the last chapter with the Council of Elrond. The dwarves waited 30 years before they went out to search for their lost comrades. It's like 30. Yeah. It's like
it's pretty whack.
I mean, it's like, it's been 30 years since we've heard from these guys. Maybe we should figure out what's going on.
Yeah, and like, admittedly, I suppose dwarves live for a longer time, so like maybe it's like the equivalent of like maybe a year or whatever in dwarf years, but like still, it's like they haven't sent word.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's actually very elvish too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's only 30 years.
Right.
Yeah. What is that to I who have lived centuries?
Exactly.
Yeah, very true. But word finally comes back that the Black Riders are nowhere to be seen. and they're pretty nervous about it, but they're like, finally the time has come. We need to get on with the journey.
Right. Let's wait a couple extra months so the journey is even harder.
Right. For the
Yes. Because nothing builds character like having to trudge through the snow.
Yeah.
So,
This whole bit is just like very ill-conceived. Yeah.
So they pick 9 people to represent or go up against the 9 ring wraiths, and they decided to pick at least one person from each race to kind of represent everyone that's going up against Mordor.
You skipped a lot.
Did I? Okay.
A little bit. I mean, like, isn't this where Frodo gets like the shirt?
Oh, that's right. That is important.
And like he talks to
right
Bilbo, and Aragorn gets his sword duct taped back together.
Right. Duct tape back.
Yeah.
So first we have a Bilbo poem.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because this poem mimics the poem Shakespeare wrote for Act 5 of Love's Labor Lost. And, being someone who has studied Tolkien, I know that happened to be one of the things that he had to include in his doctoral examination back in 1915.
Okay.
Oh.
That's why he was familiar with it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is where we hear Gandalf decides to go with Frodo.
Yes.
As well.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess we were all expecting that to happen.
I mean, I guess
anyway.
It was safe to assume.
Right. But look how many times he's left him in the dirt anyway.
Well, not by choice, by necessity.
Well,
in The Hobbit, he kind of went off.
In The Hobbit. But
he was like...
But as they've established, this is much more important than The Hobbit.
Right. But, Tristan talking about ADHD, he can't stay focused.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing. What's this is over there?
So the delay helps build up
anticipation
again. Yeah. So, and also the dimension of the red star in Bilbo's poem.
Yes.
There are some who speculate that it's supposed to be Mars.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I always thought of it as being a foresight of the red eye.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
I always thought of it as Mars as well, but Mars is always, just like in Harry Potter, it foreshadows upcoming war in Trial and Tribulations.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I have to make a Harry Potter reference at least once an episode.
I mean, like, if it is Mars, that brings up some complicated, like, questions about, like, where Middle Earth is. Is it just England? Is it on another planet? Like, oh boy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I always took it as a foreshadowing of the red eye of Sauron. And there's a lot of weird cryptic stuff like that in these books that doesn't translate to like anything else, like any other version of the story, which I really do appreciate how like Tolkien was not a novelist at all.
Right.
So he's just like, I'll put this in because it's interesting to me.
Yeah, I feel like that seems to be just the overall summary of this book is, this is interesting to me.
Because otherwise you would start with the Black Riders showing up.
Right.
You know, if it was...
Yeah, you start with them seeing, can you imagine that he would write it like fantasy novels written today?
Yeah.
You know, oh, what is this weird black rider doing through here?
Mm-hmm.
Da, 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 da. And it's like, okay, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Type of thing.
Yeah,
So
and
unnecessarily love triangle.
Unnecessarily love
mm-hmm.
triangle.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Oh boy.
But right, so earlier, Evelyn, you were talking about the nine riders to be opposite of the the 9 walkers.
Yeah.
Texas Ranger.
Being opposite of the 9 riders. I find that really interesting because, Tolkien, with him growing up Catholic, that number 9 means a lot.
Okay.
So one, it's 3 times 3 for one.
Right.
So
and 3 is a big number.
3 is a big number. About the Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
3 is also the minimum number to have some type of pattern.
Right.
And the 9 symbolizes the completeness. 9 symbols completeness.
Okay.
Throughout the Bible and other scriptures. And then there's also 9 fruits of the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
So that's kind of, for me, that's some of the tie-in of why they use those numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you even look at the rings as well, it's 3, 7, and 9, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which are all like big numbers, Catholic-wise.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that Frodo is delighted the Strider's going with them.
Yeah, he gets real hype about it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, isn't this whole thing about Strider, really?
Yeah.
Take back the crown?
Well, it's been hinted at, but it hasn't been outright stated at this point.
Well, yes.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, even the mention of the sword getting reforged, I thought that was going to be a bigger deal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not very dramatic. He's just like, and they fixed his sword, and he gave it a new name.
Yeah, I wrote down it's Andriel, which is Flame of the West.
Yes.
And something that we had talked about is we did a bonus content on something called the Volsung Saga. That was one of the known influences of Tolkien. And that's something that actually happens in the saga is a king's sword gets broken and his son reforges it to the enemies.
Right. And then also with it being called the Flame of the West, a lot of people think it has to do with the sunset.
Right.
But the West really means that range, the lands in the West and the people of the West.
Right.
Because that's the people he's supposed to be king over.
Right.
Yeah. And you also get into the whole, like, going across the Western Sea to Numenor.
Right.
Which is the ancestry and all that, which is all, like, not explained at all in these books.
Right. And a lot of what he would later put in appendices and other unfinished tale stuff would be because one of his scholarly friends would ask,
what is this?
What is this? Where does this come from? And then, and then he would share in a letter, which later gets published.
Yeah. My favorite thing about them going, okay, so there's 9 ring wraiths. There's 9 spectral forms that are controlled by the most evil thing on the planet. What do we do? Okay, we got a dwarf. We got 4 hobbits. An old man. A slightly older man. A normal man. And a 1,000-year-old being. I get that. I mean, that's gotta happen. That's gotta be it. I don't know what else we got.
Right. Even Elrond even says, like, once the other hobbits want to go, he's like, all right, I guess that's the 9. Sure. Why not?
I know. Yes. And just like, oh, make us feel welcome. Why don't you? It's like sarcasm when he says it too.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, might as well make it you do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Close to sarcasm that I think elves can get.
I mean
Pretty.
he all but says, "Oh, you're going to need cannon fodder anyway."
Oh, 100%. He's almost. I like also that he's like, well, I was hoping to send them back to warn their people. Like he's clearly like, it feels like he's coming up with an excuse.
Yeah.
It's like, they should go back and warn the Shire, you know. And it's one of those things of like, if he really believed that, he could have sent somebody else.
Already.
Yeah, to do that. Like,
He might have already done it.
Mm-hmm.
But hobbits really are stubborn and tend to only listen to themselves, so.
That's true, because they're so isolated from anybody else. They're just like, what are you talking?
That's something that we've talked about in a lot of the recent chapters, is they're very untrusting of the big folk.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
which...
I was going to just name the 9 real fast for those listening. So, of course, it's Frodo and Sam. Those were the first 2 picked. Gondalf says he's going. Evelyn has Legolas and Gimli going to represent the elves and the dwarves. We got Strider and Boromir, who it's almost a second thought too.
Right, they're like, you're headed in the same direction.
Yeah, precisely.
Yep. And then we have Pippin and Merry.
Mm-hmm.
So who makes this reading almost bearable in some.
Yeah, there are a few places where it gets a little dry, and thankfully we have Merry and Pippin to kind of shake that up a little bit.
Yeah.
But something I did want to mention about Gimli that I just happen to know from my love of The Hobbit. So as we know, he's the son of Glóin.
Mm-hmm.
And so something that I know from the appendices of The Hobbit is that Gimli was actually a friend of Fili and Kili during The Hobbit. He was a very close friend, and he was only a few years younger than them. And they were technically underage as dwarves going on the adventure, but had special permission because they were the royal princes, whereas Gimli was left behind. So for Gimli, this is kind of a chance to finally go on that adventure that he never got to take, to finally kind of prove himself to his dwarven folk and to prove his own mettle. So that's why you see Gimli being so excited and ready to go in a lot of places, is from that background.
He is. He's certainly excited about everything.
Yes.
And so after they're named, this is when Bilbo has something special to give to Frodo.
Yes.
He gets Sting.
Yes.
And he gets the shirt of Mel.
Which I think we should talk about in the next chapter. Since we're going to get to the next chapter and it talks about it a lot more, I think we should wait on that.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
And then we have another poem.
Yes, more poems.
I sit beside the fire and think.
I actually rather enjoyed this one a little bit, but it still seemed a little unnecessary.
And I have to say, the first time I read these books in my early teens, I skipped all of those.
It's been very tempting to skip them. If I was not doing a podcast about this, I might have.
Yeah. This is another instance in the audiobook where Robert Inglis sings it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's nice. It has a nice little melody, but he will also, and like, don't get me started about how much singing Tom Bombadil does. I will wake up because the volume will change because I'll listen to it as I fall asleep, and then all of a sudden he's like fully belting a song, and I'm like, what is happening?
Right.
That's a really good call.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, this is one of the ones that there is a recording of Tolkien singing it.
So if there is, I'll input it here.
Yes.
And if not, I'm sorry.
But and let us not forget the 10th companion.
Yes.
Oh yes.
Bill.
Bill.
Bill the pony.
I have quickly become a Bill stan.
It's not hard. I had a recent discussion with one of my friends about the fact that a pony is not like a baby horse.
Right.
Right.
A pony is a small horse.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of weirdly conjecture between people going, well, no, it's clearly a baby horse. It's like, no, it's like ponies are to horses what string is to rope.
Yeah.
At what point does a pony become a horse? I don't know. I'm not an equinologist.
Ooh, we could ask Emily. My cousin is a equine vet.
Ooh.
We can ask her.
Okay.
Please email me the results.
Will do.
I mean, it's kind of, now we're going down the rabbit hole, ding, ding, because that's what I'm going to mention. The difference between rabbits and hares.
Yeah.
Ooh,
that's something we were talking about yesterday because we are obsessed with a documentary series and they were mentioning hares versus rabbits. And we're like, what is the difference? And we couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
it has something to do with the ears. It's supposed to be like the only telltale sign, but still.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think hares are bigger and they have longer ears and they don't taste as good. And that's the main reason people were like, these are clearly different back in the day. Yeah.
Yes. So let's get back on track.
Yes. Sorry to derail everything.
Yeah, no, that's okay. We do that to ourselves a lot.
Yeah.
So we get to the point where they finally have taken off.
Yes.
Yeah. 2/3 of the way through the chapter.
Right.
Yes.
It feels like.
And we get the listing basically of a lot of places in the world.
Yeah.
And
yeah, we do.
And this is a foretaste, because all these places later on are going to be mentioned again in more detail.
Right. So it's just giving us I've heard that name before kind of feel.
Right.
Okay.
It's like, where is Fiji? Well, Fiji exists, but where is Fiji? Type thing. So
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know?
I don't know, actually. Hey, I'm going to look that up now.
Japan, right?
And so, I think that's it for this chapter. Unless somebody else has something else to add.
Well, I mean, they start on their journey, and it's really cold. It's a lot of snow. They're trudging through, and everyone's just miserable and awful, except for Legolas. Legolas is just, like we were talking about before, he's just kind of there, just barely making an imprint in the snow, like, what's keeping you guys? And he even, like, sprints at one point ahead, just showing off, essentially.
Right. Yep.
Because even for elves, he's a very young, he's considered young.
Yeah.
So you get that, and then we get a sense that nature is against them, between being defeated by the snow as well as the crows that we see, where Aragorn even says, or Strider says, I don't know what I'm supposed to call him at this point, Strider, I guess, where
Dave,
where this crows are spying on them, and that it gives off this ominous feeling, and they're just like, at one point Boromir and Aragorn just pick up the hobbits and start trying to just, because the hobbits, it's like waist height on the human, so it's like at least neck height.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
They probably just can't get through it all, and they're just trying so hard. And I love how the chapter ends with, they were defeated by the mountain.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Caradhras is like this big deal for the dwarves as well. It's like almost a holy mountain. And it is this thing of like, you're talking about the natural elements, which are absolutely on point. But it's also this thing of like, you get the line where it's like, you hear voices on the wind, and someone's like, is this like an incantation? And Gandalf's like, basically like, yep, looks like we're purposely being stopped here. And ditto with the crows, and they're like, okay, someone's like, they're clearly aware that we're moving, so we're kind of just SOL, I guess.
Yeah. So that's that chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you guys think of the Ringo South?
Well, I like it because you get a little bit more lore stuff, which I always enjoy. You get some Bilbo stuff, Bilbo is annoying. He's an obnoxious person who is very full of himself, and I think that's fun and funny.
I do not disagree.
Yeah, it's very funny because he's like, hey, want to hear this poem I wrote? And everyone's like, not really, but, and then he's already saying it.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Which I love. I love that for him. I do like how you get a little bit more connections to the Hobbit with Sting and the mail coat, which gives him a rash in the Hobbit, which, you know, Lord knows what it's going to do to Frodo.
Right.
And yeah, I like how, because like, it's one of those things of, you think of the only thing that came before this was the Hobbit. And so you're aware that like, this is a slightly different tonally, you know, it's a lot harder to read, and it's clearly for adults. But I don't think you at this point realize exactly how dark and serious it's going to get. And this is like a little amuse-bouche of that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, of like, oh, this is not going to be easy. Their plan A has already not worked out.
Right. Even other chapters, even though they've ended on kind of a darker note, there's still like a cliffhanger, something else might happen. Whereas this one is like just this what's the word I'm looking for? Finality. That's the word. This just finality of they have been defeated. And it gives just a really ominous tone about what's to come.
Right. And it's such an opposite of Rivendell too.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even maybe that might be why Tolkien gives us an extra 2 months too, just so the hobbits anyway have become very relaxed. They have become very hobbit again.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden this is thrown at them.
Right. I love how you're making wild gestures and this is an audio.
That's how I talk.
Yeah. You gotta express yourself.
That's right. I mean, if I had a set on my hands, I couldn't talk.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this next chapter is Journey into the Dark, and I wrote some predictions down before I read it.
Okay, so what were they?
Super.
So from my vague memory of the movie, I know there's a door involved. So I'm going to predict that there's a door involved that they have to get through. I also don't remember the movies. I should mention that too.
Okay, well that's great.
I don't remember the movies. So it's very fresh for me. So I remember there's some door involved, and I know that they go on like this crazy staircase within the mountain, but I'm gonna predict that someone's going to almost fall off those stairs.
Okay.
And that Gandalf is gonna save them and be like really pissed off at him. That's my prediction.
Okay. That could be
all right.
Any chapter though.
That could be.
It's that Gandalf is vaguely annoyed.
Though I did make an overall prediction last episode that Sam was going to stay with Frodo with no interruptions for the entire book. So that still stands as well, that no matter what happens to Frodo, Sam's going to be right there. Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I often see Gandalf as a old annoyed Jewish / Yiddish man.
Okay.
And, I expect him to go, "Oy vey."
Yeah. What do you mean we can't get up the mountain?
Right.
What's happening? Oy. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll say this. The next chapter is also one of my favorites because it has a sequence that does not occur in any other adaptation other than the radio drama. And it's really, Gandalf does something really cool, is what I'll say.
Sorry, my alarm went off.
Oh, good. Yesterday. I mean, that's up to you if it's all good. It's your podcast.
Yeah. Sorry, do you want to just repeat what you were saying?
Sure. The next chapter I also really like because I'm not going to spoil anything, but Gandalf does something that's really cool, and there's a sequence that happens that doesn't really happen in most other adaptations of like the book, other than the radio drama that I listened to growing up. And it's a really neat sequence, and it really builds on some of the ideas that we were talking about for this chapter.
Right.
Okay. Do you want to give a quick summary?
They have a journey in the dark.
Yeah, it's another pretty straightforward title.
And and they've been on the road for a while by now too. And they have come to a realization if they needed to, they couldn't even turn back now.
Yeah.
And so it's gotten very real.
Right.
For them. And then just to keep picking on my daughter about this, we get some important news from the Eagles.
Mm-hmm.
So the Eagles are doing something besides waiting to pick them up at the end of the book.
Yeah. My defense, other media has not conveyed that well.
No. The guy here, the Windlord, doesn't even talk in the movies. He's just a bird,
Yeah.
which is disappointing.
And especially since I know that the Eagles were only written into The Hobbit as a way to get Tolkien out of his own bind. So,
it's like,
so it feels like they've been written out of this to put the characters into a bind.
Oh.
That's the way I see it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it wouldn't be a hero's journey if you could go from stage 1 to stage 13 like that.
Yeah. I would also say there's this thing of like, and Tolkien even brought this up during his lifetime because people are like, why not the Eagles? And then he's like, they're wild animals. Like,
True.
have you ever tried to tame even a kestrel? Like, come on.
That is something we've talked about before. I happen to work with birds of prey, and I've worked with a couple eagles, and they could care less. All they do is glare at you and vomit. That's it.
And these are giant eagles, so
yeah,
you
these
can
are
only
giant
imagine.
Eagles. No idea what like a giant eagle would do.
Might snap your head off, literally.
Yeah, just because they're annoyed.
Yeah, and there's this weird moment. I want to talk about this it's a previous chapter, but like speaking of like the animals of Tolkien, there's this weird moment in I think Three's Company where a fox is like weird hobbits, and like we never get a moment of like, oh, all the other animals can like seemingly have sentience. Like,
right.
No, that's something I brought up as well because I got a big Narnia vibe. I'm like, wait, are the animals sentient like in Narnia?
Mm-hmm.
Especially since I knew that he and C.S. Lewis were friends. I'm like, wait a second.
It's
right.
It really threw me off when we got to that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's nothing like it ever again.
Right.
To my recollection in the series. And it's weird. And it's also like, that brings up a bunch of troubling implications for the farmers that are in Hobbiton. And like, really, you can't get into that.
No. What we decided was that it was so odd to see hobbits where they were that even the local animals had to be like, what?
Yeah.
That's what we decided.
Now, what is this new thing? Am I supposed to be afraid of it?
Which is why I love Bill so much.
Yeah. Iluvatar.
Bill is just ride or die.
Yeah. Yes, 100%. Literally ride or die.
Yes, literally ride or die.
Yeah. Yeah, he is fantastic, and it's really easy to love this pony.
Yes. And I get a warm feeling in my chest when you see the official line of them hiking up the hill and Bill's in it.
Yes.
Well.
Yeah, it's so nice. Like, I always saw the horse was in it, but I never understood it until I read it.
Not a horse, it's a pony.
It's a pony.
We've been over this.
But now that I understand, it's like, yay, Bill made it into the fellowship.
Yeah.
Yeah, the horse makes it, but Tom Bombadil still is not in the movie.
Yeah. I remember In the movie, they had to do a pickup. Like, they had an edit of Fellowship of the Ring, and one of the notes was, because I'm not going to get into spoilers too much, but they're like, what happens to the pony? Because
Yeah.
at a certain point, Bill is, something happens with him, and so they had to add in a shot of like, this is what happens to the pony, so you don't get
Yeah.
confused. Which I think is very delightful, because even like execs at New Line were like concerned for the well-being.
Right.
Yeah. Because that's what I love
Bill.
about Tolkien. He's mentioned several times about all the different horses and ponies being like, they return safely to their masters.
Yeah,
Except for the horses raised by the evil folks. They just all drowned, and I was sad.
that's fair. And yeah, it's not their fault that they were raised to specifically saddle ring wraiths,
Right.
Right.
but it's still, they're still evil horses. Does that make sense?
The evil horses.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Evelyn thinks horses are evil anyway.
I don't think they're evil.
They're certainly mean.
They can be very mean.
And if you think about the physiology for too long, they're disturbing, because like they're walking on their fingernails.
Yeah.
That whole thing, I learned that, and I was like, I'm good. I don't need to see a horse again.
So yeah, so just getting into the chapter and talking about Bill, they have stopped and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, and they've pretty much decided they need to go through the mines of Moria.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is because Tolkien points out, by going around it, not only is it going to take more time, but I don't want us bring the ring any closer to Saruman.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So they decide it's the best course of action, and everyone's like, no, can we not do this? Especially Sam and Pippin. Sam and Pippin seem to be the most fearful, but Gimli's like, yes.
Yeah.
Go.
And admittedly for Gimli, he's like, in his mind, he's like, my cousin's there. It's great. We're going to be fine. It's dope.
Because part of his mission is to understand what happened to Bolin. And so, not Bolin, that's Avatar. Balin. Sorry. His mission is to figure out what happened to Balin. So.
It's also one of these things, and here we get into the anti-Semitism. Of Tolkien has very vocally been like, dwarves are Jewish, and that has certain negative stereotypes associated with dwarves and Jewish people, and it's clearly a parallel of like, oh, Khazad-dûm is Israel, and it's a holy land, and he wants to visit his Jerusalem, and it's like a weird sort of like it. He does this thing, and like, admittedly, he does it for other cultures as well. And it wouldn't be an issue if he also wasn't like so vocally against Jewish people as well, where he uses real world cultures as like a touchstone, like as a beginning to flesh out like this. And it gets troublesome with people who aren't white, because he does describe orcs as looking Asian. And it's like, okay, dude, I know you love Anglo-Saxon, but like, can we just reel it back a little bit?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, like, I think it's perfectly fine to have like a real world base for like building cultures, because you have to start somewhere. But I think he falls into, and like, he was a product of his time, you get into that whole thing. Yeah. What I'll say is this: it has not aged well in some respects, is kind of my point.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is like, it is what it is, and it just, I don't know, like, you can't change it. The books are still good and worth reading, but it's like, it's that whole like author, artist.
Believe me, as a Harry Potter fan, I've been struggling.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's difficult. Or at least Tolkien has the quote unquote excuse of being, one, dead, two, old. Like,
right.
Yeah. Tolkien was a product of his time, whereas JK has no excuse.
Yeah.
So
There's literature.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow, they want to go to the Mines of Moria.
Right, because there's no rest for the weary, basically.
No.
Yeah.
Not at all.
There because of the wolves and the rogs that they hear.
Right.
But one of my little things I like about this chapter is that Boromir and Strider go back and forth with these old wives' tales.
Yes.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But, the wolf that one hears is worse than the one, or wait, I can't even read my own writing now. The wolf that one hears is worse than the orc one fears. And then Strider
right.
says, but where the warg howls, it's also the orc prowls. So and it does feel very,
wives' tale-y.
Wives' tale-y.
For sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's, the old, don't make faces because if somebody slaps your back, you're really stuck that way.
An apple a day keeps the ring wraiths away, etc.
There we go.
Yeah.
But eventually a wolf makes it into the camp.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of them.
And this is the first chance we get to see the fighting skill of anybody.
Right.
And Legolas just, again, he glides over the snow. He's not bothered by anything. Basically, he's not bothered by anything here. Just bam.
Right. They even
shoots really fast, and
the wording. Yeah, the wording is even his bow sings.
Yeah.
Like even his fighting style is elegant.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Gimli's just swinging his axe.
Yeah.
Right.
And admittedly, like Legolas is from Mirkwood, and Mirkwood has like giant spiders in it and whatnot. So he's probably like, these are just animals. It's fine.
Right.
But yeah, like this is a sequence that I really enjoy, and like I've always had like such a vivid image in my mind of like what this looks like with the fire and everything, and it's like very spooky, and like as a child I was very frightened by this sequence.
I definitely felt it and like envisioned it as I was reading it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially what Gandalf does next.
Right.
Which is really cool.
Gandalf goes mega Gandalf.
Yeah.
And that gives us again a foretaste of what he's going to be doing later, not much later on.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We get to see some of Gandalf's real power.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important that that a lot of the stuff he does is with fire, which comes into play 2 books later.
Right.
As to why that's the case. But yeah, he does kind of a Mark II version of what he does in The Hobbit with the pine cones, right? Where he like lights pine cones on fire and he throws them at the wolves, and he's like, well, this worked before.
Right.
But this time he just lights everything on fire.
Everything on fire.
Yeah, which is sad in a way because he does mention like the place they're in is called Holland, which is not Holland, but it is for the holly trees that are around and everywhere, and they're all like dying and destroyed because this region is not doing so hot. Because fun fact, it used to be like an outpost between elves and dwarves, and there used to be a lot of trading. And so, but that was hundreds of years ago. And so
that was something that I really liked that they mentioned was Gimli and Legolas kind of go back and forth, and we start to see the beginnings of their rivalry where they're just like, well, it wasn't the elves' fault that trade broke down, and it's like, oh, well, it wasn't the dwarves' fault. And Gandalf's like, I heard it was both.
Both, yes.
he's just cranky and like, it was both.
Yeah, just shut up and let's move along, folks.
Don't make me turn this party around.
Right.
But they've eventually, and also more quickly than in other places, reach their destination.
Yeah.
And this is where they have to let Bill go.
Yeah. And
Boom,
I
boom.
love how Sam is just so concerned about Bill. So Gandalf's just like, fine. And he gives him an enchantment so he'll be fine to do whatever he pleases, whether it be to go just figure out and find some grass to graze on or go back to Rivendell or whatever he wants to do.
Right.
Mhm.
Which I thought was sweet.
Yes. Yeah.
But
And yeah, so going back to what I was saying before is like they had to add a pickup of like Sam saying goodbye to the pony of like, oh, okay. Because they would jump to them being in the mine and they're like, well, where'd he go?
Yeah.
Right.
There's a really sad moment in the Bakshi version of the film, the cartoon from I think the 80s, where it's strongly implied that that the thing that we encounter next eats Bill.
Oh, that's right.
It's very sad, and as a child, I was like, "That's not right." And also, why did you do that?
Right. Yeah.
And
But something I wanted to mention is after the morning after the fight, there are no wolves to be seen, not even the dead wolves. Only the arrows that Legolas had shot, and only one of the arrows was slightly chipped. And they're just like, well, this is not good. They're immediately like, this is not good.
Like,
we need to move along.
Yeah.
Yes.
These aren't regular wolves.
Yeah, it's definitely double take worthy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, they've decided that they need to reach the doors quickly.
Yes.
Now.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do get there, they're able to find it again by moonlight.
Yes.
And I always found it interesting how so many things for the dwarves who live underground is affected by moonlight. The original map in The Hobbit.
Yeah, it was.
You're only able to read part of it under the full moon. Right here, you're only able to find the words above the door in the moonlight. So I always thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and you know, my my rationale reading it growing up was always like, well, they're underground, so their eyesight is only, for underground, so they probably only go out at night, really.
Yeah, that's what I always figured.
And then also it's this weird thing of like, I can't really explain the way the map, but like the elves also are obsessed with the moon in a way.
Yeah.
And we get into some stuff later with some of the elves that we meet in later on, where it would make sense that they would also use the moon for this.
Right.
Because the elves and the dwarves made the door together.
Yes.
So it's like a mix, and like I always kind of figured in The Hobbit, like it was also a similar mix of things, but I don't know.
Well, something that I always associate with moonlight is the full moon is when things are like the brightest at night.
Yeah.
So that's like the best time to, like, you see in fantasy novels, to travel at night. The full moon is like bright and like will show you your way. I know in my biology training that's why a lot of like animals and fish and such only travel during new moon, because that's when it's the darkest, so predators don't see them.
Ooh.
So it's just that's just something that I always considered with it, is just the bright moonlight, the full moon just kind of leads a path in the darkness.
Right. And then we have the weird thing about the password.
Right.
Yeah. Another riddle.
Well, yeah, another riddle. And it's been so long since I read it the first time, I don't remember what I thought about it back then. But now, it just seems like it's something that a first-time DM would throw into their own dungeon.
Yeah.
Sure.
Speak, friend, and enter.
Like, what does that mean?
Because I was totally along the same, like thinking the same lines as Gandalf, where it's just like, okay, there's obviously a password that used to be known to the dwarves and elves, but everyone who used to use it is now gone. So how in the world are we going to figure out what that password is?
Mm-hmm.
So I always thought it would be like Gimli and Legolas would have to work together. That's what I was thinking in the back of my head.
Sure.
Going into this, when trying to figure it out, it's just like, well, since the dwarves and elves made this together and used to trade here, does that mean that a dwarf and an elf have to like do like a handprint code or something? So
They have to do a handshake and a dance.
right.
Yeah.
A la the Parent Trap.
100%. Yeah.
And then there's the other side of it. If this is the trade door, why is it hidden with a password?
Right.
Ooh. I think I know. To keep orcs out.
Yeah.
Works out.
Well, because
they physically can't speak Elvish.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, because they even say it's like these doors, like during the times of trade, are meant to stay open, but if they're closed, there's a very serious reason as to why.
Yeah.
And then I love the fact that Gandalf has just had enough with Pippin.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Merry.
I know, but
it's definitely with Pippin.
Pippin,
as they're trying to open the door, like Pippin and Gandalf are just at it.
Yeah. Gandalf says, "What if I just pick you up and use your head as a battering ram?"
Exactly.
Yeah. It's thick enough.
Right.
Yeah, because they're like goofing around, telling jokes, and throwing rocks into this giant lake that's next to this door.
Yes.
They're not taking it particularly seriously, which really bothers him.
Right. And then all of a sudden this black tentacle comes out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And why didn't the black tentacle come out while they're all sitting around trying to figure out how to open this door?
Also just finally fed up with it. It's like, I'm trying to sleep here.
Well, yeah, I think it starts like they start throwing rocks in the water for fun, and that's when like Frodo's like, "Oh, there's something in there. Stop it, please."
Yeah.
Right.
And a fun change and I understand why they made this change, but an actually annoying change I think they made in the film is they have Frodo solve the riddle of the door, whereas in here it's Pippin, ain't it?
Merry,
right?
is the one that figures it out.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's also the whole thing with Gandalf doesn't know what that thing is.
Oh yeah.
It's like, that's scary as crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't know it, like yikes.
Mm-hmm.
Big yikes.
And he just gives us like kind of like there are worse things, more foul things in Orc in the deep places of the world, and everyone's like, "Hey, cool, what? First the wolves disappear, now this."
That's what I've been saying this entire time. Gandalf loves to just like throw out this information and then do no follow-up.
Yeah. Well, like he's millions of years old. I think we can give him a pass for not like wanting to expound.
Right. That reminds me of the time the Yeti came down off the mountain and had coffee.
Yep.
Yeah.
Excuse?
And
yeah.
But also you can also pick up that this creature is going after the ring bearer.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it really targets Frodo.
Yeah. And somehow it's easy to connect a big, dark-looking beast with tentacles as something evil.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting that it doesn't show up until it's time for Frodo to get away from any other thing that could
spy on him, I guess.
Spy on him.
Yeah.
Because if something happens to him within the mines, would something be able to retrieve the ring? So trying to get that ring before it might get lost again.
So they enter.
So they are.
Very cautiously.
Very cautiously.
And I like how Tolkien takes great detail in exactly what order they go in.
Yeah.
Right. Well, again, it's a DM.
And
What's your marching order?
Yeah.
and it makes sense because, like, you got the guy, like the men protecting the hobbits and so forth, and you get the whole thing with Boromir kind of being assigned to Merry and Pippin because nobody likes Merry and Pippin and nobody likes Boromir.
Right. Yeah, because, I mean, and throughout most of this, we don't even hear anything about Boromir.
Yeah, just there.
So it's like, oh, and Boromir. I mean, they, yeah. I almost would expect if they would have added Bill the Pony into the name list that Boromir would even come after Bill the Pony.
Yeah.
So, and it makes it almost sound like it's an afterthought for the writer.
Right.
You know, just to get to the, because I mean, he is the first one, spoiler alert, he is the first one of the party that is no longer there.
Well, I know Sean Bean plays him and he dies.
Yeah.
You know that.
Yeah, that's one of what, 9 times Sean Bean dies in the movie?
Right?
He's so good at
it. He is.
And we get another poem.
Yes.
The world was young. And I definitely know this one is on the Tolkien's audio collection.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I like this song. It gives a good, interesting history.
Yes, it actually isn't boring to read, and
it gives us
some real information.
Yeah. But I like right before the song that Gandalf says he has no memory of this place. Which, again, like Gandalf has said, he's been here before. He's done things here before, but he doesn't remember it at all. And that's concerning.
Well, this part of the place anyway, because obviously he's never gone through the door either.
Right.
So.
He just knows of the door.
Of the door. Right.
Yeah.
Because it's, because Gimli is the one that finds the path.
Right.
To the door.
Yes.
So they continue on. Sam worries about Bill a little bit, which is so wholesome.
Right.
And they decide, like, they're doing a lot of traveling with little rest, but they finally decide to rest in this area. And there's this giant hole that they're all a little wary of.
Yeah, we haven't slept for days, so let's go to sleep by this big giant hole.
Right. And everyone,
always confusing.
Yeah. And everyone's just avoiding it, except for Pippin, who Tolkien even says has this strange curiosity about it.
That comes up so much with Pippin's character. He is just like drawn to weird stuff. And he's like, I don't know what this is. I need to know what it is.
Very took of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird parallel between like the whole, I think in the appendices, correct me if I'm wrong, they compare the folk that Gollum used to be to like the Brandybucks and the Tooks. And it's this weird sort of parallel of like obsessive, like curiosity about things.
Right.
And there seems to be like a cultural divide between Buckland, specifically in the Shire, but also with the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Halflings.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we find out where Mithril comes from.
Yes. We finally learn about the chainmail, which Gandalf even says is worth more than the Shire and all of its inhabitants combined. And Gimli responds that it's a gift of a king that Bilbo would have it. Like, only kings have this. And Frodo's like, what?
Sorry?
Like, okay.
Like you can almost envision him like pulling his shirt up and making sure it's covered.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which also is like, Bilbo kept it in a box under his bed.
Yes.
Has no idea the value of this thing. And he's like, well, this is something my friend gave to me. And you know? Did you hear about my friend that I went on an adventure? Yes, we heard about the adventure.
Yeah.
Ugh.
But we learn more about Moria in this as well, in the Moria Silver, and how it's kind of hinted around how the dwarves, they that greed overcame them almost, and they dug too deep and awoken something.
Right.
It's kind of hinted at here that something's going to be coming.
Right. And for all the wonderful things that you hear about Durin, you know, this beast, which we'll see later, is known as Durin's Bane.
Yeah.
And it's probably the reason why even the second party that went to try to find it again and get it running again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And may I say something about this whole Durin situation? And this is one of the frustrations about like the whole elves blaming the dwarves thing. I believe, once again, correct me if I'm wrong, if you know, Durin had one of the 7 rings, and the magical properties surrounding the rings are 1, it makes you find more wealth. 2, it also makes you exponentially more greedy the more you find.
Yeah.
So it's not as though he was just a greedy person. He was also under the influence of a cursed object.
Right.
Like a Horcrux. That's
sure.
true. I got 2 in.
Well, if you think about it, the One Ring is just a Horcrux, and J.K. Rowling stole that idea.
Exactly.
That's the Horcrux of the matter.
Yep.
But yeah, they're in this big old, next to this big old hole, and Pippin just drops a stone in.
Right. And I like the way it's described. It sounds like hammering.
Yes.
Right. But it's interesting, though, that Pippin hasn't learned anything.
Yeah.
I mean, he awoke this beast by throwing stones into the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like literally 20 minutes ago or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And now he's throwing rocks again, and Gandalf's just like, I'm about to throw you down the hole.
Yeah.
Like,
I heard you hobbits like holes. Chuck you down one.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, Gandalf is just, he's over it at this point.
He's so mad. He's a crotchety old man. God bless him.
Dealing with this, so like Pippin's the equivalent of like 19 or 20.
Yeah.
Harry's the equivalent of 16 or 17. And he's just over these 2 young idiots.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is like, admittedly, why, I mean, Elrond would have been cautious of sending them. It's like, okay, so who do you want? Do you want a teen? Do you want a teen hanging out with you?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Talk about millennial and a boomer.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's making a...
Which is the entire point of this podcast, is a millennial and a boomer.
Yeah. It's Pippin with me making a TikTok video.
Yes.
Ah?
Boom.
I can definitely see them doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Like just doing TikTok challenges while they're supposed to be like keeping watch or something.
All right.
I don't understand any of this.
Before we go too much further off the rails,
Yeah.
anybody have any last words?
Well, at the very end of the chapter,
Mm-hmm.
they find Bolin's tomb.
Yeah. They do find Balin's tomb, and Gimli is just devastated.
Right.
Right.
Because this obviously confirms what happened to him.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is that he's dead.
Yeah.
He's mad dead. And seems to have been dead for some time, is the thing.
Especially if he's had an entire tomb made for him. That means that he even potentially died first.
Yeah.
So it's like, so my question now at the end of this is, someone obviously built this tomb. Where did they go?
Yeah.
That's what my mind is right now.
Right.
Well, stay tuned.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can go ahead into predictions. I predict we're going to find out what happened to him.
Well, what's the name of the next chapter?
Oh, yeah, I should probably know that first.
It's the Bridge of Khazad-dûm.
Bridge of Khazad-dûm.
Yeah.
Great track off the original score of the film. Yeah.
All right.
So that's one.
Yeah.
What else you got?
I'm going to assume this is the part where Gandalf's like, "You shall not pass." Like, I was tempted to make that this time, but I'm like, no, I feel like it's too early. But then I realized how far into the book we are.
Yeah.
We're very close to the end at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and guess, like, the Gandalf fighting the monster thing is going to happen.
Okay.
And I need one more. We'll find out what Khazad-dûm means.
There's a bridge.
Okay.
Yeah. There's some sort of bridge involved.
Right.
I'm assuming.
Yes. So, again, yeah, spoiler alert, there's a bridge.
Well, hey, I didn't know what Ford meant, so.
That is true.
There you go. Nor should you. It's not, like, don't feel bad for that.
I honestly, like, I just went to, is this just another spelling of fjord? Like, that's where my mind went.
Well, at least you didn't think it was like
Ford Mustang.
Went down to the levee in my Chevy type of thing.
Right. Yeah. Or Harrison Fjord.
Harrison Fjord.
Yeah.
Look, we gotta get to Rivendell real quick here.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and wrap up.
Okay.
And then, so Tristan, tell us where we can find you.
Oh, I have a website. You can go to tristanjmiller.com. I have a Twitter, tristanjmiller1. Those are the two things I use the most. If you find stuff you like on those things, I also have a Patreon. Guess what it is? Patreon.com/tristanjmiller.
Nice.
And I got a couple podcasts. I have one where I review mystery media with two of my friends, Tyler and Melissa. We watch a lot of Poirot, but we also just did a rewatch of Number One Ladies Detective Agency, which is a great series on HBO. Then I also have an interview podcast called Positive and Negative about mental health and its correlation to the arts.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
All righty. Any final thoughts?
Any final thoughts? No, I think we're starting to get into the meat.
Okay.
Of where we're headed.
More action.
More decisions are more important.
I'm going to assume more travel.
Hey, you know, it.
I'm going to go ahead and predict that they're traveling more.
Yeah.
that is one criticism some people who don't like the books I'll say. It's 1,000 pages of a long walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
So, yep. All right. Well, if that's it.
All right. Well, I have been Evelyn.
And I've been Robert.
And I am and always will be Tristan.
And we've been talking about it.
Yay.
Hey guys, so two things. One, obviously, we were unable to find that recorded of Tolkien, so if you know where that is, definitely tweet at us so we can listen to it as well. And then, when it comes to the difference between a horse and a pony, my cousin has informed me horses are bigger and ponies are nicer. That's apparently the biggest difference. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. I have been Robert.
And I have been Evelyn.
Podcasters are Robert and Evelyn Lewis.
Edited by Evelyn Lewis.
Produced by Robert Lewis, Evelyn Lewis, Regina, and Comic Canary.
Music provided by Ben Sound. Link in the description.
Support us on Patreon at Token About It Podcast.
Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Tolkien About It.
And Twitter at Token Pod.
Thank you all again for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.